Thank you for tuning in to the Political Soup, where you hear editorial about the issues of the day and political philosophy. Your hosts are Nick Alex, our progressive, Dana and Pugh, our conservative, Paul Laws, our classical liberal, and here is our moderator and your host, John Toll.
Hello again, and welcome back to the Political Soup podcast. I am John Toll, your host for this evening, and well, pretty much everything you've seen so far. Hopefully you've been watching these before. We've got the usual suspects below, Danon and Nick and Paul. Tonight we are going to be talking about, well, basically gun control. There's articles all over the place, but the ones that we picked out, or rather I should say that Nick was nice enough to find for us, started out with an NRA ad calling Obama elitist hypocrite for daughter's security detail at school. This one is on foxnews.com. We'll have the link down below or somewhere nearby. There's another one as well on the Huffington Post, which is actually just a repost kind of a Reuters story with a similar name. But the general gist of it is that the NRA has an ad out to try and combat the Obama and left side ideas about gun control in reaction to the recent shootings and at school, unfortunate things like that. So the ad is saying that essentially Obama's a hypocrite for having his kids have security, even though it's Secret Service, but we'll get into that in a minute. So I'm going to start out with not Nick again, and I'm going to go to Paul on this one. And Paul, I'd like your take on this articles, or all the articles in general that are talking about this.
Well, it is sort of unfortunate that that they took that road. Although, you know, honestly, this isn't anything new. I mean, this has been done forever. I think the first one that I found where a president's kids were attacked was, well, and frankly, let's be clear. I'm not suggesting that this ad is attacking the kids. But the first ad that actually did attack the children that I was able to find was Grover Cleveland's kids, and you know, this has been going on forever. You know, Reagan's kids got attacked, Bush's kids got attacked, Clinton's kids got attacked, Bush's kids, you know. Younger Bush's kids got attacked. It's nothing new. And, you know, that said, here again, I don't necessarily think that their intention was to attack the kids, but looking at the content, they make some good points. They bring up some really good questions. I mean,
Hold on, Nick. We'll get to you in just a second. I promise.
They bring up some very good questions because, I mean, the president is, in fact, suggesting that, you know, it's okay to protect his kids and him, for that matter, with guns, but he's also saying that he's skeptical of whether that is the right road to go, you know, for, you know, other kids. And, you know, if it's good for one route, why wouldn't it be good for all routes?
All right, Nick, give it a shot. What do you got?
Well, okay, so let's start with a couple facts. I mean, from a personal standpoint, I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe people have the right to bear arms and own guns and whatnot. I think what kind of rubbed me the wrong way with this article and why I brought it to the group beforehand is I think, and Paul started to allude to it before kind of moving on to, you know, other topics, is the idea that we're going to use an ad that criticizes the president for having Secret Service there, you know, Secret Service around his kids while they're at school, while they're away from the White House. And use that as a reason to criticize gun control arguments. It's hubris at its worst. It's moronic. It's the idea that you're going to make a general comparison to citizens at large to the president's kids. It does nothing to advance the cause for the Second Amendment, and it only makes you seem petty. And the idea that we're going to have, we're not going to protect the president's children, considering the position that he is in. There's probably nothing worse than the idea of having a sitting president that has their kids kidnapped or taken through force. So we're going to leave them unprotected. That doesn't make sense. So you're comparing that to my children. I have two children, school-age children, elementary school children that go to school. I don't expect them to be protected with people with guns because, quite frankly, their value to somebody that would be trying to do harm to this country as a whole is nowhere near compared to the Obama's kids. So it's asinine politics. It doesn't do anything to advance the rights of gun owners, and it just makes people that are pro-gun like me just feel like, well, the NRA really doesn't care about me if I'm in general being a pro-gun person, because I'm pro-gun, but I also think it's okay to have background checks and that we know where guns are coming from and where they're going, and that we track them and have a database on them. I think that's okay, and you can still have your right to own guns. But the NRA believes in absolutes, and they don't want anybody to have to submit to a background check, or they don't want any kind of curbs on ammunition. That doesn't make sense to me. And I think that we can have a debate about it without resulting to the lowest tactics, which is what I feel the NRA did here.
Okay. Now, Dana, one of the parts of the articles that have been repeated quite a few times, depending on the article you look at, say that the White House has called the NRA ad repugnant and cowardly. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was looking at that. I wish I had a little bit more context for that. In the same paragraph, I see what you're looking at. It says White House has called the NRA as repugnant and cowardly, while New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has said it was reprehensible and undermined the NRA's credibility by bringing the president's children into the debate. Nobody here has really made this accusation, but it's certainly in the articles that, well, the kids should be off limits, and how dare they bring up the kids. But yeah, it's not bringing up the children. Yeah, it's addressing President Obama, and it's addressing Obama's policies and personal policies and public policies with respect to his kids. But it has nothing to do with the kids. It has nothing to do with their behavior, who they are. It's not attacking the kids, really, in any way. So I completely reject that. I'm not saying I'm in full support of the ad. I kind of fall in the middle between Paul and Nick, but I think it's a silly argument to say, how dare you bring up the children?
Okay, well, what do you think about the ad in general, the concepts that they're bringing up? Do you think that they're right or they're wrong, maybe somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, my first reaction was along the lines of Nick, that it's a bit silly to compare the average school kid to the president's kids. Certainly they are bigger targets. But then having thought about it a little bit, that's still generally true, but what about, say, Donald Trump's kids or Bill Gates' kids? They're all older than school age by now, I'm sure. But
well, as you pointed out, though, with the president's kids being at larger targets, so would those gentlemen's kids be as well. I mean, if you're going to ask for ransom, you're going to want Trump's kids. So in a way, he has to have the same protections just for that reason alone.
But anybody from the private industry, I guess I can't claim to be an expert on all the gun laws, especially with private schools and so forth. But I don't see them being afforded the same kind of protection as the president's kids. Certainly, the president's kids would be a top target. I don't think anybody is much more at risk than the president's kids. But there are other kids who are also high targets as well.
What were you going to say, Paul?
So should it be just the elite that gets protection?
No, and that's kind of where I fall more in line with you. But so I guess there's kind of two sides of the coin here. The one with respect to President Obama's kids and other high-profile targets are regarding kidnappings and such. the whole reason we got into this debate was for a shooting that was really not targeted at any high-profile kids. It was targeted at the general public, and that is where I fall more in line with Paul. That and also I think generally the point that the NRA was trying to make, even if they didn't make it very well. But I fall more in line with the deterrence, that if there was an armed guard, or even if people were allowed concealed carry, that it would deter these kind of things, or if not deter, it would at least put a stop to them a lot sooner than 20 children.
Statistically, it's drastically different. I mean, statistically speaking, I saw a statistic a while back that said that when an armed citizen stops a mass shooting, there are generally 2.4 or 2.5, I can't remember exactly what the number was, people killed, and when it's stopped by the police, it's generally up in the vicinity of 18 or somewhere in that range.
I can believe that. Yeah.
Nick, you look like you had a comment on something that Paul had said a minute ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that this is, I think the broader thing here is that we can sit here and we can debate the individual ad, and I think we've all made ourselves clear on where we kind of fall in the ad. But I think that the general thing is, we had this tragedy in Newtown, and clearly. Nobody on this panel, and nobody, with any shred of decency, thinks that was an okay thing. And there can be a reasoned debate on how to prevent those things in the future, just as well as there can be a reasoned debate on how to ensure, safety of a firearm owning society like the United States is. I mean, we have a constitution that guarantees our right to bear those arms. So what bothers me in general, and what I think this is, what this ad is kind of a larger example of, is that we have an organization that is somewhat of the figurehead of gun ownership, and the way it enters in reasoned debate is to attack. It doesn't make the case for why gun ownership is okay in a reasoned way. It will not consider one iota of tracking guns or getting background checks. They think that this is a limit on our rights. And we're talking about a product that, if used appropriately and if used correctly, kills. And the idea that we're not going to track where we buy guns and where we sell them, so that we have an understanding of what arms are out there, I think is silly. I don't think it abridges our rights whatsoever. You can go through a background check and still go ahead and buy a gun. If you have to wait 3 days, then you have to wait 3 days. Is that such a huge burden for us as a citizenry that we can't have reasonable controls around the system?
Well, let's talk about this for a minute.
Yeah, so I think that's what to me, that's what this whole discussion really is about.
Okay, well, let's address this directly, and Dana, I'm gonna pick you for this one just as a first response. What do you think about the ideas that he put forward? Some people might say it's a little bit Orwellian. It's Paul likes to use the word draconian, but we'll get to that in a minute. But what do you think about the idea of the tracking needing to be there and it being a helpful thing?
I'm embarrassed to say that I'm not very clear on the new gun laws that are proposed and passed.
Well, let's just talk about the general concept.
I was just trying to look that up, but we already have all kinds of gun laws in place, and I don't know that passing new restrictions is the solution to the problem. The problem being shootings, I guess. But I've made the point elsewhere that it's an uncomfortable reality that these things will always happen. That no matter how much we do as a society, through government, through culture, atrocities will always happen. There may be more or less of them, but at some point something horrible is going to happen. that will cause people to, or that could not have been prevented with any number of laws in place. And we go through this debate whenever something like this happens. We did after 9/11, and we do after pretty much every shooting like this, and talk about what could we have done to prevent it. Well, in some cases, maybe, yeah, in 9/11 there were some things that we could have done. Some of these shootings, there are some things that could have been done, but at some point, I'm very bothered by the constant tweaking of the system and passing more and more regulations that appear to only affect good people. I don't want to say the law-abiding, but that term's slightly ambiguous given the context. But passing more and more regulations that seem to only negatively affect people who would never dream of doing anything like this in the first place.
Yeah, there's some arguments that there's a mental condition that no law is going to fix, in these particular individuals. And before we get to you, Paul, I want to see if Nick has anything he wants to address in what Dana just said.
I mean, to me, it's like, okay, well, let's at least here we're having a reasoned debate about it, and that's why I was, kind of bringing it up. It's like, NRA doesn't really believe in having reasoned debate, and to me, it's society is going to change, technology is going to change, and with that, we're going to have to continually tweak and advance the way we put control systems around the way we operate our society. And so, the fact that background checks don't apply to every single gun sale right now, well, I think that's an issue, and I think it's an issue we should talk into and address. The fact that people don't have to register all their firearms and with their serial numbers into a database, I don't understand why that doesn't happen.
But is that really going to prevent stuff like this?
It doesn't necessarily need to. Well, I mean, I don't know if it will prevent it or not, but it at least allows for, if people's, and maybe I'm watching too much television, I'll freely admit that, but
too much NCIS.
Well, yeah, but if a fired bullet has a certain signature that's unique to each gun, and if that's on file, in a database, then and a bullet like that shows up in a murder, what's wrong with having a database there to peruse and check it against? It provides us with the ability to go forward and do some investigation. So, maybe if everybody knows that their ballistics are on file, and maybe they'll think twice about using a gun for illicit purpose.
Yeah, and that's all well and good, but that's not the source of the current debate. I mean, we all know who's behind these shootings: the school and the Dark Knight shooting and anything else that's been in the news lately. I think what brought up this debate was the idea of putting a stop to these, either preventing them or stopping them with as few fatalities and casualties as possible.
Yeah, but we have to realize that what happened in Newton or what happened in Colorado or at Virginia Tech, that represents a very small minority of the gun violence in the United States. I mean, there are more crimes committed with guns than just those mass murders.
That's what brought this up in the current national debate.
Right, because
what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what brought the topic to the forefront. But again, that's not the only source of violence. It's these types of stories that gain national notoriety that allow the debate to be brought forward.
But I don't see the debate being around unsolved murders and the need to improve forensic evidence.
Yeah, the question here is obviously whether or not this is the debate that we're having is truly relevant to the events that happened. But we'll get to that in a second because I want to go back to that topic. But first, Paul's been bottling it up for a little bit here, so go ahead.
Release the hounds.
Well, I can't believe that I'm actually defending the NRA on this one, but I'm going to have to because, and the reason I can't believe that I am is because they don't really quite go far enough. But I'm going to have to because, of common sense. The Founding Fathers created those laws, created the Second Amendment for a very good reason. I mean, they created the Second Amendment because of the government protection from the government. It wasn't protection from ordinary citizens. It wasn't to go shoot deer. It wasn't to skeet shoot like the president apparently does. It wasn't any of those reasons. It was protection from the government.
Hold on a second, Paul. Let me tangent off just a second here.
Sure.
What do you say against the argument that's against that concept that the Second Amendment and the militia and all the ideas surrounding it are actually for the ability for the government to call upon the people when they need them to sort of stand up and be a, extra army against, say, Britain or whatever was attacking us at the time?
Well, that's absolutely true.
Okay.
But that has no bearing on anything, because I mean, let's look at a few quotes, which I actually happened to prepare from our founding fathers, that actually kind of get to the heart of this. A free man ought not only be armed and disciplined, but they also should have sufficient arms and ammunition to maintain the status of independence from anyone who might attempt to abuse it, which would include their own government. That was George Washington. The supreme power the supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by sword, because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops. That was Noah Webster. I've got a ton of them here. I've got one from George Mason, Thomas Jefferson.
You made your point. Why don't you post a link to whatever you're looking at down below,
sure,
so that everybody else can check that out later.
I can post the links.
All right.
Yeah.
I was just giving you a little bit there.
The point is that these men clearly knew that we would need protection from our government. And that's what this is about. And this has nothing to do with well, I guess it sort of has to do with protecting your home, because that's a nice side benefit. But it was all about protecting the liberties of our posterity, of their posterity, which of course is us.
Okay, but continue on with the article and why you think that the NRA needs to go even further.
Well, that's the whole reason, because our founding fathers went further. I mean, our founding fathers seem to suggest that, any weapon that was available to our government should be available to the people, because, clearly, if we are to
still believe that
defend
now?
ourselves, of course, clearly.
So a person wants to own a tank, an M1A1 Abrams, they should have it.
Sure.
Nuclear missile, they should have it.
Sure. They can figure out how to make it, sure.
Yeah,
I find that just,
It's interesting that there are people who say, well, the assault rifles and such didn't exist back when the Constitution was written, and neither did tanks and drones and any number of technologies now. And so along those lines, in terms of defending ourselves from the government, I would agree with Paul and say that, assault rifles to private citizens may help level the playing field against an aggressive government in charge of tanks and similar devices. I don't want to sound too kooky in saying this, thinking that our current military is going to come after us or anything. I have nothing but utmost respect for our military, thank God. But,
sure, that's not the point, though. I mean,
exactly.
The point isn't. The point is the fact that that we are a formidable force against our military. I mean, our founding fathers didn't ever believe that we would have a standing military. I mean, that would have been.
We shouldn't?
I guess really that would probably be a wise thing if we didn't.
Oh, John, we have about 5 shows here, I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, we're going to save that particular conversation because Paul, I think you contradicted yourself. You've talked about how the government should have, what their primary purpose is to protect the people. In your eyes, as your level of classical liberal, as you like to say, what are you switching viewpoints here? I mean, I'm just curious. I don't want to make a total side topic on this.
You're suggesting that I'm saying that the government should protect the people with a standing army, and that's not anything that I've ever suggested. I mean, when our country started, we didn't have a standing army, and we protected ourselves quite well.
Okay, so you prefer militias or state-based armies? I mean, how do we protect ourselves exactly?
Well, that's how it initially was. That's not a bad route. I don't mind that route. I mean, as it is right now, we have a military. We're not going back to having militias anytime real soon, or we don't seem to be. So I mean, we are where we are, but we should at least have a defense that's equal to the firepower that could come against us.
Okay, well let's talk about one thing in specific that Nick said, and then Nick, I'll yield to you in a minute here. But Paul, what do you think about the idea of putting all the guns in databases and all the serial numbers and everything that Nick suggested along those lines?
I think that it short circuits everything that our founding fathers ever meant. It short circuits the entire intent of the Second Amendment.
Why?
I mean, well, it's simple. The Second Amendment was to defend ourselves against the government.
But why is putting your gun into a database an abridgment of your... If you still own the gun and you still have it, why is it an abridgment of your right?
Because now the government is well aware of who has what weapons. And, you know, not to get kooky here, but the fact is you have to be, you know, cognizant of the fact that if the government is aware of who has what weapons and the government does come in a tyrannical way against the people, the weapons will be dispatched very quickly.
There are 200 million weapons in private citizens' hands in the United States. You don't think that, or you think that our standing military can go confiscate 200 million weapons? It doesn't make sense that you still have the right to bear it. It doesn't say in the Constitution that you have the right to bear your arms privately. It doesn't say that you don't have to share the information about your weapons. It just says that you have the right to bear them. You have the right to own them. And this isn't abridging on that.
Well, it's simple. It's abridging on the spirit of it. And, you know...
The spirit of what? You still have the ownership of the gun.
That's the letter of the law. That's not the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is such that it says that, I mean, you look into what our founding fathers had to say, you know, they frankly would have been appalled by the very thought of registering firearms.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Paul. Essentially that whether or not you could really take out 200 million people is another question, but the idea is that you have very well-marked targets, perfectly, in fact. Granted, you know, if there was like some horrible situation like this, everyone would probably not stay in their house, right? Right, Nick? Nobody would stay in their house because they knew that, hey, look, our guns are registered, so now they know where to blow my house up. So I'm going to go somewhere else and, you know, whatever. It's a far-fetched situation, but I understand what you're trying to say, Paul.
It is very far-fetched, and, you know, the likelihood of anything like this happening is probably very low. But, you know,
but whatever we do, then let's not address that the other big elephants in the rooms that are much more likely. We have to worry about the most, you know, obscure possibility. This is the exact thing that we were talking about, or
because that is the condition, that is the natural condition throughout history of societies. Throughout history, societies are not prone to liberty. We got lucky.
So again, let's go back. Let's go back to something that Danon was saying a little bit earlier about not wanting to tweak the laws, not wanting to change. And this is what my response was, is that, you know, societies change. When the founders wrote the Second Amendment, They didn't understand modern armaments, and so it goes back to my question. And Paul, you can shake your head and you can disagree, but here's the point. The point
I'll
is
prove my point in a second.
well, no. The
ahead.
point is that they didn't have tanks, they didn't have laser guided bombs, they didn't have F-16s and F-18s and stealth bombers and nuclear weapons. Those things have such enormous firepower and such danger to the world that I don't believe that it's okay for anybody, just anybody, to own them. And when you're sitting here and talking about the Second Amendment in terms of preventing tyranny of government, it's very limited in its scale. I mean, we all freely admit it's a very unlikely situation to happen here in the States nowadays. But if people are armed with AK-47s and assault rifles and whatnot, it's still nowhere near the comparison of the firepower of what our standing military has, and whatever deterrent that people have against the standing military going against its own populace and its own people. I wouldn't put much of a chance in those people being able to survive an onslaught of a well-armed, well-trained military machine like the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Just doesn't happen. And so we're sitting here and talking about the abstract of the Second Amendment when quite clearly I feel like we can still defend the Second Amendment without talking about tyranny of government. And we can have a situation where we provide the right controls in our society that allows us to have information about very deadly weapons and allows us to track them. I think that's okay. And I don't think it has any fundamental impact on your ability to bear arms. And the fact that we can't even enter that debate with the NRA, that's problematic. And that, to me, is the definition of hubris. And that is why I look, back to the original article and the original ad and say this doesn't help us as a society move forward on gun ownership and gun safety. It stops us from having a reasoned debate.
All right, hold on, Paul. Before you reply, another way, and Nick, what I'm asking you is if this is another way to put what you were saying. Back when this was originally written, when the Second Amendment was first thought up and everything else, there were muskets, there were cannons, there were swords. That was about it. So pretty much everything the government could have, everybody else could have, because it was all very limited, practically person-to-person technology. The cannon could take out a couple more guys, but not very accurate, that kind of thing. Now we have technology on the level of either erasing cities, if you want to go with the whole nuke scale stuff, to smaller neighborhoods with non-nukes but bombs, to particular blocks, to using a satellite and a drone to take out a particular car in the Saudi Arabian government. There's all kinds of options now. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that the discrepancy between the technology available and the technology possible and in use has become pretty drastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I said I don't believe the Second Amendment the founders would never have granted that kind of power to individuals, to any individual, and that there has to be a limit. And we accept limits right now. We do not sell M1A1 Abrams tanks to individual citizens. You can't buy those on the open market.
Well, that's probably because we would just sell them to foreign companies or countries for a lot of money. So there's other reasons for that too.
Yeah, but if I was Bill Gates and I wanted one, I couldn't buy one.
Right. Well, go ahead, Dana. You've been huffing for a couple minutes, so.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, how how much money it takes to develop these things? I mean, I guess I could say that on a large scale, if some company wanted to come out and design a tank or a fighter jet and market it exclusively to billionaires, along the lines of the high-end yacht market, I guess it's somewhat conceivable, although billionaires and the filthy rich get a whole lot more use out of yachts than I'm sure they would out of tanks and fighter jets. We're talking Bond villainy at this point. Who's going to buy a tank, and who can afford a tank? Not to mention a stealth bomber or a nuke or anything like that. That stuff is incredibly expensive to make, and that's not even including the development costs for any enterprising individuals who need to make their own.
But if you could afford it, would you sell it to just any citizen? I mean, that's the thing. That's the question at hand, right? If somebody could afford it, would we prevent them from buying it? Because I would be.
Know, man. Who's going to buy it? Who's going to buy it and use it, and how are they going to use it?
Well,
what are the scenarios here?
It's a question of scale. I mean, we're kind of leaping to the far end of this as an example that's sort of an almost practical impossibility. But the idea is, where do you set the limit? And you know, I think that Nick and a lot of people on that side of the fence want to say that there should be a place where, you know, it becomes ridiculous to allow sales. But
why? I mean,
that's the question.
It's sort of a silly argument because there's no real benefit for owning it, so there's not a lot of loss for prohibiting it by law. But I mean, I guess just on principle, who's going to buy a tank? And if somebody wants to buy a tank and go on a killing rampage, they're going to be stopped by the military or militia or whatever a lot faster, with a lot fewer casualties than somebody who wanted to make a homemade bomb and blow out the base of a building, or say hijack an airplane and fly it into a skyscraper, for instance.
Right.
Who's going to own a tank, and who's really going to accomplish that much more than they could without a tank?
So what's your hesitation for saying that, you know, if there was a purpose, what's your hesitation from saying that you wouldn't sell it to somebody? Is it because that once we establish that there's a limit somewhere, then it becomes a question of where we draw the line, or is it the fact that you don't want to say that there's a line?
I don't know, man.
Well, okay, Nick, where do you draw?
I don't know.
Go
That's
ahead,
a great
Paul.
question.
Paul, I'm going to give you the slippery slope on a platter. Here you go. Slippery slope. Go ahead.
I mean, honestly, our founding fathers didn't draw a line. You may think that they would have drawn a line, but you know, history doesn't say that. I mean, they had some pretty nasty weapons. You know, cannons were pretty powerful. Frankly, you know, have you ever heard of a puckle gun?
What's a puckle gun?
No.
A puckle gun, created in 1718. It was the first machine gun. Yes, our founding fathers had access to machine guns, and those were legal. They were legal to own. You ever heard of a Knock Valley gun?
No. Keep going, Paul. If you're gonna try to make the case that armaments in the 1700s and armaments in 2013 are of the same kind of, you know, deadly force, I'm going to find that that kind of argument really kind of incredible. Well, it's not incredible.
Not relevant.
Of course, it's relevant.
It's not.
But somebody could have bought one of those weapons and gone into a public place and killed a bunch of people. I don't recall that happening a whole lot, and I would wager a guess that not a lot of private citizens owned that kind of artillery.
Actually, a lot of private citizens own that kind of artillery.
So there you go.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it was legal, and they owned it, and they were encouraged to own it. Matter of fact, actually, I was about to explain the Knock Valley gun. It was the British gun of choice. It was a 60 caliber weapon. It had 7 barrels. You know, these are not, they're not wimpy weapons. You know, they're not going to blow up entire cities, no. But, you know, the point is, they do damage, and a lot of it.
I think the next question is, what is your point?
Thanks, John.
Well, my point is simply this: our founding fathers took the most heinous weapons of their time, and said, yes, these are available for your protection against your government.
Well, what the founding fathers did is they didn't draw a line. They didn't go out and articulate that you can buy these things or those things. What they did is they articulated that you can bear arms with no limits to it. And what I would say is they didn't have an understanding of what modern armament was. So to me, the question becomes, if you're going to draw a line, where? And I think I would find a significant portion of the population that would say to you that it's not okay for somebody to own a tank, and it's not okay for somebody to own a stealth bomber, and it's not okay for somebody to own a bazooka.
But I think that's because they don't think it through.
But I would think that
because who's
whether or
going to
not they
buy
think
a
it through
stealth
or
bomber?
not, whether or not they think it through or not, that most people in this society would accept some sort of limit onto what the Second Amendment is. You know, what kind of armaments does it protect? And you know, is the line a machine gun or a flamethrower or whatever? You know, there's a line to be drawn somewhere, and the argument or the debate should be about where to draw that line. And the thing that gets frustrating is that we have a number of people that are so absolutist about this that they would freely argue, like Paul is, that there should be no line drawn. And to me, that's asinine.
You're wrong.
Well, you're saying there's
We're
no
all
line.
drawing a line. We're all drawing a line. I'm drawing a line.
Where's your line then?
My line is you take the most powerful weapon that your government has, and that's where the line's drawn. You can have that
Above it or below
and
it?
everything below that.
You can have that. Well,
You
then
can
that's
have
no
that
line.
and everything below that.
So you're saying that that there's nothing on the other side of the line.
I draw the line where the government draws the line.
So there is no line to be drawn then.
No, he's saying
Draw
that
the line where the government law draws the line. I mean,
he's
it's
saying
very
if aliens come in with better technology, but the government doesn't have that, then we can't have that. That's what he's saying.
essentially, yeah. I guess that would be
But
that'd be a
Damon,
reasonable statement.
I don't know about reasonable, but Damon, what did you have to say like a minute ago?
The only reason that I hesitate when Nick asks about a line is foreign governments and I guess terrorist organizations. That if there was a private organization that manufactured not tanks, because that would be dumb, but I don't know, whatever else
Bazookas.
along those lines. Sure, yeah, rocket launchers. Okay, RPGs, whatever. That I guess I would be concerned about a total open market to allow sales to foreign nationals, in a sense. I mean, I guess sales to foreign government of rocket launchers isn't a big deal. I'd be more concerned about nukes, but yeah, I mean, falling in the hands of terrorists and other stuff like that, that's where I hesitate.
Well, what do you mean you hesitate? You hesitate that you would you'd like
I
to see
hesitate
laws to prevent.
To completely throw in with Paul to say that I hesitate to say that there should be no line. But I guess
drew a
don't
line.
think-
I drew a line.
No, Paul, could you quit
We
pretending
all-
I
like
drew
you
a
drew a
line.
line? You
we
didn't
all
draw a
know
line.
better, Paul.
Of course, I drew a line.
You
But I don't
can
claim
say
to have
that,
the
but yeah. So what you're saying, Danon, is that in your eyes, you're not sure about selling some of the more high-powered weapons to personals, or rather, just citizens of the country, because they might end up selling it overseas. Because even if we have laws to say you can't sell it to personal or to people overseas, if we say you can sell it to personal, citizens of the United States, there's nothing to stop them from making that available to the rest of the world. And that's why you hesitate?
Yeah, right. And it's a complex issue, and I'm sure there are several solutions or possible solutions available. But it's something that causes me pause to
There
say that everything should be
let me
allowed.
just say,
There
as you
is
go up the high,
potentially one thing that I could possibly say maybe no.
Okay, wait, Paul.
slingshot.
Paul, I want you to save that for the very, very end of the show. I'm going to come back to you and get your one thing, okay? So hold on to that. Nick, what
Well,
were you saying?
it's
No, don't tell me.
No big deal.
Just save it. I know, but you're going to save
it's
it
an
to
easy
the end.
one.
Nick, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that as you move up the firepower scale, the more deadly the weapon, the more need there is to track it, to understand what's out there and who has taken ownership of it, and know where those things are. So that's all I was going to say.
But generally, the deadlier the weapon, the fewer there will be in circulation. I mean, excluding anthrax and chemical and biological weapons and such. But if we're talking about large weapons, artillery and such, the more the more deadly, the easier it's going to be tracked, whether you have a centralized list or not.
Hold on, Paul. Hold on.
Chemical and biological weapons, though, are kind of they're a different subject altogether, and really so are nukes.
Yeah, you're probably right.
But there are arms. Right, the bare arms.
Yeah,
they're a different subject. They really are.
See, but that right there, Paul, at least you're drawing a line. Now the question becomes, where do you draw the line?
Well,
because absolutists would tell you that an arm is an arm. It doesn't matter if it's a traditional ballistic weapon or if it's a
different subject. I haven't suggested that I necessarily draw the line on those, but I'm not sure about that. I haven't given that as much thought as I probably should. But I frankly that's the only thing I could potentially say maybe.
Okay, so is that what you're throwing out as your line? Maybe not nukes.
Oh no, definitely not.
Okay, so what's that? Let's finish up.
I guess there is one thing that I definitely have to say that I would draw a line.
Go ahead.
The nookie. Those things hurt, man.
I knew it was going to go that way. All right, guys. I think we're about out of time anyway. I figured Paul would drag us into the muck with that.
I've been putting this off, and I keep getting sidetracked. And I'm going to kick myself if we end the show before I make one more centralized point to the original story, and that's Nick mentioned ignoring the elephant in the room, and on that note, I think that's sort of what was motivating the NRA, because like I said earlier, the national debate is centered around these kind of mass shootings. And President Obama is coming out with, and our legislature is coming out with different gun laws and regulations and all that. And I think, speaking for the NRA, I mean, I'm not speaking for the NRA, but if I can infer, it sounds like they thought that our legislators were ignoring the elephant in the room. And in that sense, I don't think that they were going on offense, that they were coming out attacking. I think they were being more defensive, that they're seeing the government encroaching on their liberties, which do nothing to address the problem at hand. And so their ad was centered around armed security officers in schools. And I think that is a reasonable proposition.
Okay. I can see the fair points. And Nick, I think you've kind of addressed that previously, so unless you have something you want to throw in there?
No, we're
good?
We're good.
All right, we're good. All right, thanks, guys. We are done with the show. You're welcome, Dana, anytime. And thanks again to all three of you for your contributions to the show every week, Paul, Nick, and Dana. Thank you, audience, for joining us once again for the Political Soup Podcast. And John Cole signing off for the evening. Have a good night.